We are especially scared today. Um, and like praying and hoping that the world is okay and that everyone we know and love is okay. Um, and as soon as the Zoom room opened and I saw Marsh's face and then I saw the rest of you guys trickling in, like you all, like I am blessed to be in community with you guys. And there's no way I would rather spend this time where I'm worried and confused and scared than learning with you guys. So thank you. And especially, I mean, some of you, anime, it's lovely to meet you. I don't think I've ever learned with you before. Um, I think just about everybody else I've learned with you guys before, and it is fabulous to see you guys. I'm excited to be able to do this with you. Since you've learned with me before, you know that I don't absolutely require you to put your cameras on because I can't come into your house and press the buttons for you. But if I could, I would. So please, please, please put your cameras on. I'm not going to be lecturing at you. Hey there. Oh, hello. Really lovely to see you, Elisheva. We'll be making meaning together. Um, we started last week, and if you weren't here, that's fine. We started last week looking. We thought we were going to look at all of the first verses of the 5 chapters of Lamentations, and surprise, surprise, we only got through like half of one verse. Um, and we were thinking about how do we read this verse, this half a verse here and now today? What happens when we read this half a verse here and now today? And what we'll be doing today is we started with the very first half a verse of Lamentations last week. We're going to be reading the end of Lamentations this week. And the end of Lamentations, the final chapter of Lamentations, is different from the first 4 chapters. The final chapter of Lamentations is the only chapter which is not a alphabetic acrostic. It doesn't start with the first letter of the first word, doesn't start with Aleph, and the last doesn't begin with Tav. Now, because this is the text we've studied for 2,000 odd years together, people have found acrostics in it where it's not alphabetic acrostics, it's other ways of putting the first letters of the lines together and pretending that it says something or finding things it does say. It's sort of like I don't know if any of you play spelling bee on the New York Times, but it's sort of like that. Um, and one of the things people have found, which I can show you, but it's not even worth it. It's really like playing with the text. Is they found if you put the first letters of some of the first lines and some of the last lines together, you can make it spell Zachariah Hanavi, which is Zachariah, which sounds horrible in English, but Zachariah the prophet, who is a second temple prophet who comes to prophesize the building of the second temple. It's that, happily ever after story. It's the like, okay, Lamentations is talking about the destruction of the first temple, but here in a acrostic in the final chapter of Lamentations, we have the promise of redemption. We have the happily ever after story hiding, and isn't that lovely? And I tell you that because one, it's kind of interesting, but two, because that is not at all what we're doing today. And that is not what Tisha B'Av is about, as far as I can tell. This is going to be a sad and difficult 25 hours. This is a sad and difficult day. This is a day where it is not just okay to cry, it is the right thing to do to cry, to be sitting with destruction, with despair, with anger, with all of those overwhelming emotions that for the rest of the year we say, okay, like, well, let's talk through them and then find the silver lining, or let's find how we proceed from there. This is a day where you just feel the emotions. You just are the emotions, where it's been an incredibly difficult past 10 months. And this is a day where that's all we've got to do. So I'm gonna take you into a very dark place, and I'm not gonna take you out of it. Um, I'm happy to take you out of it later, but that these are 25 hours where it's okay to be in that dark place, where we are together in community, sitting together in a very dark place, and we hold this sacred time together in order to do that. Of course, if you don't feel up for being in that dark place right now, that's fine. Don't go there. But I want to invite you to let yourself sit there with me. Uh, the way I've read Lamentations forever, there's 5 chapters. For the first 4 chapters, there's really two different voices in conversation with each other. One is Jerusalem, the personified woman, and the other is this anonymous male voice. And we see them in conversation where at first the anonymous male voice seems rather distant. And by the time we get to chapter 3, the anonymous male voice is sitting with Jerusalem, identifying with Jerusalem, holding Jerusalem's hand, feeling Jerusalem's feelings with her, saying, "It didn't just happen to you, it happened to me." And then chapter 4 continues, and we see Jerusalem saying, like, "Yes, but things are still really, really bad." And then we get to chapter 5, which is what we're going to read today. And we no longer need the construct of personified Jerusalem. We are now talking as a we. The voice that's speaking is a we. It's a me and a you and a Marcia and a Don and a Sylvia and all of us here together making a we. We don't need to hide behind anything. We've become a community of individuals who have chosen to sit together, support each other, and everything still sucks. All the problems are still there, but we have gone through these first 4 chapters of things being so bad that we needed to hide behind another sort of identity, and gotten to the point where we can say, no, like, I exist, I'm going to still existing, I've survived to this point, and I'm going to reach out and hold hands with the 2 people next to me and cry and rage against God and demand that someone make sense of this for me, demand that we live in a better world because everything is wrong. Oh, so um uh the final thing I'll say is last week I'm going to repeat something I said from last week. There's always a question of why Lamentations, the first 4 chapters, are written in alphabetic acrostics, and then the 5th chapter, which we're reading today, also follows some sort of organizational pattern. And what I said last week is when you're writing an alphabetic acrostic, you're answering the question of how can I possibly begin to speak after destruction? Like, I can't say anything when I open my mouth, all I do is scream. And the alphabetic acrostic comes and says, yes, you're screaming, and that's first scream, that thing that's wrenched from your being is Eicha, right? It's ah, and it turns into Eicha. And that the alphabetic acrostic allows you to turn your scream into speech, to turn your pain into speech. Um, and then the problem is once you start speaking your pain, how can you ever stop? How can you not drown in everything that's happened to you? And the acrostic answers that as well and says, because when you get to the final alphabet, you're done. When the way you stop speaking is you get to the last letter, and that's enough, and that's going to be enough for you. And I think there's something incredibly powerful in the idea that the first 4 chapters are alphabetic acrostics, and this final chapter that we're reading today no longer has to be an alphabetic acrostic. That it's still 22 verses long, but we say, okay, I know how to speak now. We together know how to speak. And we can speak our pain, we can speak our meaning. Together, we're comfortable ending, we're comfortable beginning. We're no longer in quite the same space of shock. All right. So we're going to start together. Uh, we've only got something like I'm hoping we're getting through 8 verses today, but you never know. Um, I sent the source sheet out. Let me just share it with you guys in the chat as well, in case you didn't get my email. Um, uh, and and just if you've come in recently and you don't have a camera on, turn your camera on so I can see you. 1, 2, the way this works in class is you all are going to be doing a ton of the talking. When you want to talk, either raise a hand or raise your Zoom hand, and I will call on you. Say what you want to say and get out. Don't like talk at me for 20 minutes. If you have a thesis or a dissertation on the subject you want to share with me, I'd love to see it. Send me an email. Don't don't uh don't be the one holding a lecture. Tov. So, Marcia, if you're still there and you're up for chanting, I know I would love to hear you chant. Um, but
I can I can chant. My Wi-Fi is steady, so and so I'm not even able to. Let me go get my I have it right here. I'll chant for you. Okay, I'm so sorry. You're here.
no worries, no worries.
I'm sorry. I'll you start this class. I'm
Marcia, I'm sorry. It's really we can hardly hear you, so maybe next year.
yes.
Well, let's do this. And in the meantime, do I have any other people who chant here? All
I
right.
could chant a little bit.
All right.
I think I can.
Awesome, Elisheva. Thank you. Would you do the first 3 verses?
Give it a shot. Zachor Adonai mehayalanu habita u'et cherpatenu nachalatenu nehefalazarim batenu linachrim. Yitomim hayinu ve'en av imotenu ke'almanot.
Thank you, Elisheva. All right. So I was talking to my husband very briefly before this class, wondering whether it was like whether I should try not to cry during this or not. Um, and I've been teaching this for years, and reading this now is different. Um, I do want to make space for how reading this now is different, but and before we get there, tell me what's the ask here. Like, this is us talking. This is us talking, and we're not quite in destruction in this moment, right? That many people often read chapter 5 as like the next generation, as even like after the destruction of the first temple, as if we've now gone back to Jerusalem from exile. We've had our 70 years in exile. We've gone back, and we're saying, okay, let's talk about what happened once. Um, but what's the ask? How does this chapter start? How do we try? Like, what's gonna make it better here? What do we want? Don.
Yes, I think what we want is God to recognize our suffering and um, give us an answer as to where God was while this was all happening.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Keep pushing. Other thoughts. What do we want? What do we want, Sylvia?
what struck me is that we remember that there is God.
Great. Okay.
As for folks, we didn't actually know that anymore. So yes, and I agree with Don. We want from God. What have we done? But we know that He's there, so we could ask.
Yafe, yafe. Okay. Yeah. I mean, it starts right like a command to God, God, remember. But Sylvia, you're reading it almost as like, and in order for that to happen, first we needed to remember God. That we're like calling God back into existence or demanding God's continued existence almost. Voila, cool. Elisheva.
We want to be seen and acknowledged. We just want like witness. Remember us and see what happened.
Yafe, right? And that's, we haven't done all of Lamentations together, but that's in the first chapter of Lamentations, over and over again, we hear Jerusalem crying out where she says, look and see what has happened to me. Look and see, that Habita Ula language over and over again. Okay. Okay, so we want to be remembered, we want to be seen. Why, how is that, what does that do? Why, like, what are we hope's going to happen? What does it mean to be seen? What do we want God to remember? Why are we calling out to God at all? Is this, I mean, is this, no, we'll get there. Don and then Karen.
Um, my thought is that, look, God, we had a relationship and a promise, and this has happened. How do we reconcile this? How do we restore that relationship of closeness?
Okay. So it's you're using all these re-terms, right? Like, how do we go back? How do we reconcile? How do we get back to the thing that once was? That, which is really interesting, right? That it's the way you're interpreting it this on is a return, almost like a tshuva to the past. Is how do we make the future look like what the past was? How do we pretend this past 10 months was just a blip that didn't exist? Okay. Karen.
How do we get back there?
I think we're asking God to remember the covenant.
Okay. Sorry, keep going.
Oh, I was going to say in verse 2, that's what I see. Nachlatenu.
Okay. Yafe. Okay. So we're asking God to remember the covenant and and like that we have a nachala, that this is our land that God gave us and we've been exiled from. Remember that this is ours. Yafe, bring us back to our tribal inheritance. Okay. Is this, yeah, Jeffrey.
It strikes me that in the third verse that we're orphans, we have no father. So if God is our kind of father, to say out loud that we've lost that, even that, and we have no parents left to take care of us, that's really dire. I mean, there's really no going back when you lose your parents. That's it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, yes. Okay, so let's dive into that for a minute, and then Megan, I'll see you. We'll come back. So I don't I don't know if you've been watching Israeli TV, if you're on Israeli media at all, in the past couple of days. Um, there was a woman testifying before the Knesset, before one of the committees, and she she's about my age. She's got a 5-year-old son. And her husband was taken into Gaza on October 7th and murdered. And she played for the Knesset this recording of her 5-year-old saying, like, don't worry, Ima, I'm here. I'll take care of you. When things are hard, I'll take care of you. I'm here for you. You don't need to cry. You don't need to worry. And this is a 5-year-old kid saying that. And it's the kind of thing where it's like, what does it mean when we're reading this verse right now that Jeffrey's pointing out and saying we have become orphans, we don't have a father, and I think there's some collapse between the fact that like we literally don't have a father and we've lost contact with God. We've been separated from God, the Father, and we've also our literal fathers have been murdered, are gone, are dead, have been lost in exile, are stuck in the tunnels. Yaffe. And that there's also, for those of you who were here last week, you remember the first verse of Lamentations. We talked about how could the city become like a widow, right? So we're reusing that same language here. We say imotenu ka anamot. Our mothers are like widows. And it's that same almost identical language from Lamentations 1, where in Lamentations 1, it was about Jerusalem personified by Jerusalem. Now it's our mothers. It's like real and actual people. Okay, Megan, and then other thoughts after Megan on what the ask is given the context that Jeffrey's bringing in. What is it that we want God to do? What is it that we're asking of God, given the description of ourselves, the way we think of ourselves as orphans, like widows? Yeah, Megan.
I sort of saw it, instead of going back, as calling out to God. You've got to look at what happened to us. There's nothing. How do we go forward?
Okay.
Nothing. And there's no forward looking. With Jeffrey, I was thinking there's no forward looking, quote, what father symbol might represent. It's hopeless, but what do we do?
Interesting. Yeah, that there's something almost so the first 4 chapters of Lamentations are very much focused on personified Jerusalem, and then when we hear from the children, it's the children really as victims. The children asking where is the bread and wine. The children literally being killed in various gruesome, horrible ways. And the fact that here in chapter 5, like we are the children speaking, in some ways, again, like that is a hopeful thing. Like we are necessarily the future, even if coming from a very troubled past. Okay. Sylvia.
And kind of, I think that's the point, isn't it? We are the future. And the quote that you, this thing that you talked about with the 5-year-old and his father and his mother, what he was saying is, I'm coming up for you. I'm the future. And we are the future because that's all we have. We don't have our parents anymore. We don't have Jerusalem anymore. We don't have the big fortified city. We don't have it. We have each other, and we have to be the future. So I think this is a beginning of saying that.
Okay, fantastic, Sylvia, fantastic. So what are we asking of God then? What are we asking? If that's the case, what do we want God to do? What does it mean for God to remember and see? Like, or if we're not returning the past, what do we want to happen? Sarah Nee? Mr. Newman? Oh, unmute yourself.
It's not Serenade, it's her iPad. But my name is Neil Newman. So I'm thinking that these verses in particular are trying to express the yearning for God to feel our pain, the remembering and just the knowledge and the imagery of being fatherless and motherless is pleading with God to feel the pain, which I find a little bit interesting in the sense that Jeremiah is supposed to be, is the traditional author, and not Jeremiah's. I mean, most of the book of Jeremiah is an indictment of Israel, and it's almost admitting that God is the source of the pain. So it's a little bit of contradiction if you accept the the traditional authorship, but at least the author here, whoever the author might be, is, I think, crying out for God to feel our pain.
Interesting. Interesting. Yeah. So it's if we've lost our parents, we've lost everything that moored us, and we've lost God, and we're crying out, and we can't get our parents back. We can't get everything that moored us back. So much is lost, so much is gone forever, but the God is not necessarily gone. That of the people, of the entities we've lost, God is the only one that you can call out to and hope comes back. Wow. Margie, you were almost raising your hand.
Thank you. For some reason, my hand isn't going up. I think that being remembered means that we existed. I have heard people who are dying who will say, talk about me, remember me. And I feel like this validates our existence.
Wow. Yeah. Awesome. Awesome. Okay. Don.
Yeah, Bex, this may not be on the subject, but I remember watching a movie where a famous Italian comedian was acting as the father of a Jewish family during Nazi occupation of Germany. And they were close to a concentration camp. And the father tried to protect the son from the horrors of what was going on by ingeniously making it into some sort of a game to distract the son. They were separated, but at the end, they were reunited with each other. I don't remember if the husband was reunited with the wife, but it had an ending. But the film was very touching, and I wish I could remember the name of it.
Is it Life is Beautiful?
Yeah, that was it. Yeah. Uh, um, and I know it doesn't have a resolution to what we are sharing today, but the emotion, I think, of protection and of protection of loved ones and the things that we do to protect loved ones in the face of tragedy is superhuman.
Really interesting. So I think combining that with what Margie was saying, with like, so what is it we're asking God to do? What do we like? Horrible, horrible, horrible things have happened. What do we want of God? What does it mean when we say, God, remember, God, see, God, look at us? We're saying, okay, God, like, do I still exist? Like, when I look at myself in the mirror, I I don't recognize myself anymore. When I like say, okay, I'm Bex Sarah Moshe, and my parents are gone, then am I still myself? What makes me me? And what I can't remember myself, I can't recognize myself, or if I'm the state of Israel and I'm saying, okay, we are the state that takes care of its citizens. We are the state that brings our hostages home. We are the state that did Entebbe, and this is where we are 10 months in. Like, if I can't recognize myself, if I don't see myself as myself anymore, I'm saying, okay, God, remember me. God, like, reflect me back at myself and tell me that I still exist. Tell me that I'm still here. Tell me that when my past is broken, tell me that there's still a future for me. Jeffrey.
I was just thinking that maybe it's comparable to when the children of Israel were in Egypt crying to God to the extent that God finally heard the anguish and the pain. And so maybe what this is asking, maybe what we're asking, the we, is for God to save us. I mean, just simply that, it's so dire, it's so terrible. You've been gone, we hardly know you. Bring us back. You be the one, God. Bring it all back for us. Help us out.
Yafei, completely. And similar, you and Diane on the same page, surprise, surprise. But Diane's wrote in the chat, God parent us, right? That it's called, every time in the Tanakh when we've suffered enough, we cry out and God hears us. And that happens with the barren matriarchs, and that happens as we go down into Egypt, and that happens over and over and over again. And now we're saying, okay, God, like we've suffered enough. It's time. See us, hear us, change things. Faye, Anna.
I'm reading kind of a indictment of God,
okay,
like it seems very pointed how it says we have no father.
Great.
Kind of, yeah.
Great. So not just God parent us because we haven't because our fathers are gone, but because you are gone. Like remember your duty to. Sorry, go on, Anna.
Oh, it's like we're trying to make God feel guilty or something like that.
Yeah, I sorry, I don't remember who said about the covenant, but this is like, God, you have responsibility to us that you have neglected. Come back to us. Come back and parent us. Come back and father us. Stop abandoning us. All right, we're going to do Sylvia, and then we are going to do the final 3 verses because we got it.
We are. Okay, good. But in asking God to say, yeah, you got to take care of us because you always did, wasn't like part of the point at the end of Deuteronomy when we were about to cross the Jordan that said that he said to us, or Moses said, I'm not going to be here all the time, and you have to learn how to be adults. Those things are going to happen. And what are you going to do? And yes, God will help us, but will he do that? And so I don't know, what are we really asking to go back and have God do everything for us again, or asking that just he be with us while we go back and do what we need to do?
Yaffe. Okay, awesome. So that often when we use the parent-child metaphor in the Tanakh, or not really metaphor, parent-child way of describing the God-Israel relationship, it's later prophetic descriptions or even descriptions in the Psalms of how good life was back when we were wandering in the desert on our way from Egypt to Canaan. And it's this like romanticized view of our past wanderings when God, the father, took care of us, the child. And Sylvia, you're pointing out like that was a one-time event. 1 and 2, when it was actually happening, wasn't great. Like we weren't very like I'm glad my dad did not behave towards me the way God the Father behaved towards Israel the child in the desert. He kept killing off great swaths of us. But that there's something weird about wishing for that, about wishing for God as father in the biblical paradigm, because like we can't go back. We can't go back to the 40 years in the desert. And even as we're wishing for that closeness with God, like that was a once in a nation's lifetime thing. The way that the return from Babylon to Canaan will be described uses a bunch of similar language to the language that's used for the Exodus from Egypt. We definitely understand it in the same terms, but even so, like God's not walking before us in a pillar of cloud and fire. We don't have a Mount Sinai moment. All of that was a one-time thing. And so when we're asking God to be our father, God to remember us, like we can't demand a literal return to the past. Okay. So we've got Don, I'm gonna skip you because we've gotta keep moving, but I want to hear you talk on the next thing. Um, we're gonna skip the middle box and read the final 4 verses here, verses 19 through 22.
Like me to chant them?
Yes, please, Marcia.
Ata Adonai Leolam Teshe Kisacha Ledor Vador Lama Lanetzach Tishkachenu Tazvenu Liorech Yamim Hashivenu Adonai Elecha V'nashuva Kadesh Yameinu Kekedem Ki Imamaos Me'astanu Katsaftu Aleinu Admo Hashivenu Adonai Elecha V'nashuva Kadesh Yameinu Kekedem.
Thank you, Marcia. And you guys will have noticed that Marcia chanted that as we chanted, which is to say, the Megillah ends with verse 22. We go back and chant verse 21 again because it's too horrible to end with verse 22. Okay. So we talked in the first chunk about what it meant to ask God to remember us. You'll notice in verse 19 and 20, we're talking about eternity and we're talking about forgetfulness. Talk to me about what is like, how are we understanding God here? And what are we worried about God forgetting? What does it mean that God forgets? What has God forgotten that we were asking God to remember in the first verse? How do you use these 2 verses to help you make sense of those verses we were doing before? How does forgetfulness here help us to help you to make sense of what remembering was? And what I'm going to invite you to think about it as now too. What are we remembering and what are we forgetting? Where is God helpful in that? What can we not remember? What is it useful to forget? Why when something like destruction of a temple, when some destruction of Jerusalem, October 7th, when something of a national tragedy scale has occurred, why are we talking about remembering? Why are we talking about forgetting? And what is God's role in each of those? Big question. Don, take us away.
Yeah, I think we attribute human quality to God. Your comment about we can never go back strikes me because I think we can go back and remember.
Okay.
We can remember the many times. And I think that is what recreates the bond that we lose once we have a shocking experience. That remembering is like the pathway back.
Really interesting. Really interesting. Okay. Okay. Other thoughts keep pushing, remembering and forgetting now. What do we remember? What do we forget? Why is God forgetting? Why are we asking God to remember? What are we asking to be remembered or forgotten? How does eternity function here? What's going on? What's interesting?
A lot of fear.
A lot of fear. A lot of fear. Sylvia.
Well, yes, a lot of fear, but I also think that throughout our history, we always have channels to remember, so that, not because we want to go back to Egypt, but because we want to remember all the things that happened, so that we can move on. The problem, as I see it, is that we forget too easily. And if we forget, is God going to forget too? He's going to forget us. You know, we've in the last 150 years, maybe longer, there's been a whole the whole discussion on assimilation. The way we assimilate ourselves out of existence. And if that's the case, where's God? And if it's going on now, can God help us not do that? Or is it up to us? I mean, you know, and basically, I think that for many of us, the fear, this is just coming back to personal things, fear of death is more like fear that will be forgotten by our loved ones.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah, which is really interesting then with this, like all the descriptions around God in these verses are all like, God, you are forever, you are forever, you are forever, you are eternal, right? This timeless quality of God, as opposed to the like temporary aspect of what mortals all are, right? We come and we go, and God is forever. And so that there's, of course, we had this mortal fear of disappearing, of being forgotten. And here we were almost wiped out. So God, remember us. God, someone wrote, remember the covenant, right? Remember that you've chosen us and can replicate us in each generation, can make it so that our history spans forever, even as us as individuals die out. Cool. Megan and then Elisheva.
For some reason, there's a little bit of, I want to say sarcasm here, where we say, hey, God, there you are sitting on your throne from generation to generation for perpetuity. Have you forgotten us? Did you forsake us for the forever and ever? And it says, return your relationship. I mean, you promised you'd never wipe us out again. Renew our days, you promised. Unless you have utterly rejected us, you have fumed over us too much. Reminds me of the nose of the bull. There's a little bit of, come on, God. You promised. I don't know.
It's completely like this is, I mean, this is like an indictment of God, right? This is a like, I'm holding you up to your side of the bargain, God. Like, where are you? You've been forgetting us, and like you need to remember us, because that's who you are. The way you, God, hold a mirror up to yourself is through us. We are your mirror and you are our mirror. And if you've forgotten us, like, what does it mean that you're sitting on your throne from generation to generation? You literally measure yourself in the generations of humans, in the generations of us. And if we don't exist, how are you measuring yourself? Who are you without us? Right. And then even at Megan, that's just such a wonderful comment, right? Like there's something about like you are sitting on your throne, on your kisei forever and ever, right? Now, this is a lament. This is Lamentations commemorating the destruction of that throne. Like God's throne on earth was the temple in Jerusalem. That's been destroyed. And we're saying, nonetheless, you're sitting there from generation to generation. Nonetheless, like you still exist, your throne still exists, and we need you to make us exist still as well. Awesome. Really cool, Megan. Elisheva.
There. Well, I have to run in a minute. No reflection on this conversation at all. And I think I'm thinking about relationships in general. And I know we didn't read the middle part of this and all that, but part of me also is like, okay, this is the I'm really hurt and where are you voice. And I'm thinking about the where am I? And like knowing that if this is all sinat chinam, like what happened to like, I'm really sorry and I hurt and I feel lonely. There's a lot of you language. Um, and I'm wondering like if I wanted to turn this inside out, we have no father. So, okay, we inherited this mantle. What am I going to do in this place of sadness and sorrow? And how do I own it and fix it? And I want to turn it around like the like it's this mirror, and someone else, you talked about mirror and someone else said it in this way, but what if instead of you return God and will return, but like actually we're returning. And even as we say this is us returning. So you're invited. We're going to set the table a little differently. We hope that we can clean this mess up. We haven't rejected you. There's a place in our hearts. What can we do? Like I guess I want to feel like a voice, not the hurt voice. So this is like a little bit after PTSD, but like the humble voice, like, how can I be better this time? And how can I make it different? And thank you so much. I'm sorry I have to go.
No, thank you, Elisheva.
And thanks, Mark.
Um, okay, fantastic, fantastic. And Elisheva, you're completely taking us where I want to go. So awesome. All right, we're gonna go Rhea, Marcia, Neil. And then after the three of you, we will be thinking about what Elisheva said with this final request we have of God. Hashivenu Hashem Alecha v'nashuva. Who's returning to whom? How does return work? Like, what is this? What is this request? Is this doable? What are, especially going into Tisha B'Av, like what is it we want to happen? What are we doing? How are we sanctifying our tears? What is it in these 25 hours that we can cry out at God and hope happens? So Rhea, Marcia, Neil.
So isn't the destruction God's destroying because we did not obey? That takes a totally different perspective. So we have to ask for forgiveness. And is this reversible? And, from the perspective of the people in Jerusalem at that time, their whole world was destroyed. So how do we deal with that?
Yafe, right? And that there's something really scary and horrible about the fact that like we're reaching, if we think that God did this, and we do, like how do we reach for a God who caused our pain? That's I mean that's I think this is the first year I've ever taught Lamentations where no one's brought up the Holocaust. So I am. But it's a, in the wake of the Holocaust, how do you reach out for God? In the wake of anything really, really horrible that's happened, belief in God breaks, and you still need to believe in, and still like the only one who can fix anything is if you believe in God. Like you need a higher power to fix a destruction of immense proportions or of horrible evil. Okay. Marcia and then Neil.
I guess I just want to offer something that I think about so often, which is that, I in reading chapter 5 and then coming to verse 21, take us back to you and let us come back, renew our days as of old. I guess what I want to always say is that it's impossible for me not to read all of Lamentations actually, but especially this chapter in light of the fact that some, some remnant of Israel still exists, maybe not in Jerusalem or in the Jerusalem of our ideal, but that we say that verse every Shabbos, every time we read the Torah. I feel like that is the redemption in it. That the devastation can never be so devastating as long as we're here to study this, and as long as there's some fragment of descendants of Abraham who are still reading Torah. I guess I just wanted to know, like, do you ever think about that?
Yeah, thank you, Marcia. It's I want to bring us back to that the hearing before the committee of the Knesset, right? Where for years I've thought something like you just said, where it's like, well, a remnant survived and like we will always be in relationship with God, and like Israel exists forever and we get a continued chance. And that's all true. And in some ways that's best exemplified by the fact that this 5-year-old kid has lost his dad and he's still there. But this 5-year-old kid has still lost his dad. This woman has lost her husband.
Yeah. Yes.
And I think that the genius of the Jewish calendar is that we're sitting here on Tisha B'Av and we can mourn the loss and just mourn the loss and just feel the loss and come out of Tisha B'Av on our way to Rosh Hashanah. Come out of Tisha B'Av with what Elisheva is talking about, where we say, okay, I'm broken and I'm hurt and the world's broken and the world's hurt. And what can I do? What if I've demanded of God that God return, that God remember, that God do this, that God, this is all on your plate, then as we exit Tisha B'Av, we move into Elul, we move into towards Rosh Hashanah, and it's not about God's tshuva, it's about our tshuva, which I think works really interestingly with the line you brought, Marcia, Hashivenu Hashem Alecha B'Nashuva, right? Like, God, you need to do it. God, I'm asking you to return me so that I can return. That right now, where I'm sitting, like, I'm too broken, the world's too horrible for me to think about tshuva, for me to get to a place where I can return to God. God, I need you to be the one who like pushes the marble first, and then once you push the marble, like, and I'm the marble, and I'm so ready to roll. Yafei. Okay. After Marcia was Neil. Yeah.
So I just wanted to point out the fact that it seems to me that Le'olam in verse 19 and Lanetzach in verse 20 are synonymous.
Mm-hmm.
But Le'olam in 19 is asserting that God is eternal, that God is always there. God was before us and will be after us. And in 19 and in 20, it's asking God, how can you desert us? How can you forget us? If you are eternal, is not your people eternal as well? Lama lanetzach tishkachenu. And just related to a situation on this very day, how can 76 years after the establishment of the state can we be in such a precarious situation and our nachala threatened?
Yeah. Thank you, Neil. All right. In a crazy turn of events, we are basically out of time. So I'm going to close with two things. One, as we enter Tisha B'Av, I want to invite you to come in with the Lamentations 5 mentality. I want to invite you to come in with a belief that it's worth crying out to God, a belief that like our tears are worth something, that like we can we've got 25 hours to cry out to God, to demand that God see us, to demand that God remember, to demand to put our pain, to put our nation's pain before God and ask God to see, to remember, to come back, to let us return. And I wanted to invite you also to sit with that pain, that pain is real, that so much of functioning day to day for the past 10 months has been not feeling that pain, or has been putting that pain aside. And this is 25 hours where like you are that pain and that pain is you. One. And two, I want to invite you guys to take time to try and add to the Jewish tradition of writing lament. That we've looked a little bit into the structure here of acrostics. We've thought a little bit about what's happening when you write lament. Why are you writing lament? And we've written them for centuries, for millennia, starting with Lamentations and through. Every time anything bad's ever happened to the Jewish people, we answer by composing lament. I think it answers well Elisheva's question of like, well, what can I do? How do I make this about stuff I can do rather than just complaint, or rather than just putting things on other people? And there's been some incredible moving lamentations written in Israel over the past 10 months. And I want to invite you to try your hand at it. I think you guys have my email. Feel free to email them to me. I'd love to read them. And if people want them shared with a group, I can send them out to everyone whose emails I have as well. I hope you all have a meaningful and easy fast, and Shavua Tov.
I want to again thank you all for being here, Bex, for this beautiful conversation that even if no one's going to synagogue tonight or tomorrow, I'm sure we'll sort of carry with all of us now. And because we're always looking for the next redemptive moment, I'll say that many of you are here because Bex, Bex, and you follow her as a great scholar and teacher. The Advanced Learning Institute meets every week, and our next series is with a wonderful teacher named Rabbi Daniel Levine, really quite a special young man who'll be talking all about how Kabbalah has completely reformulated our understanding of God, in its rise back in the late Middle Ages. And he's just a wonderful philosopher and teacher. Please feel free to join us. You're welcome all the time. This class normally meets at 9:30, not 10. We met at 10 these last 2 weeks to accommodate Beck's schedule, but we'd love to have you part of our ongoing learning group, and thank you again. Zom Kal.